Good afternoon and welcome to the May 21st. Try it again. Good to go? Good afternoon and welcome to the May 21st special meeting of council. I call this meeting to order. I do note that we have quorum this afternoon and we want to wish a happy birthday to Councillor Andrew.
Welcome over for cake.
Today, council will receive a presentation of the draft 2025-2026 operating budget presented by the Director of Finance. Council will have the opportunity to ask the Director and CAO questions during and after this presentation. It is the intent of today to receive the information, so Council, we will not be making any decisions today. And I'm sure when you leave here this afternoon, you'll have more questions, and we can follow up with those at a subsequent meeting. We only have one item on the agenda today, which is to receive this draft budget. So I would take a motion to approve the proposed agenda. Deputy Mayor, and seconded by Councillor Savage. All those in favor? Those opposed? Motion is carried. CAO, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship. This budget is a challenge, to say the least, this year coming up due to a number of factors. There's been some pressures on the revenue side, expense side, reserve side that have kind of been building over a period of time and sort of in a culmination this year. Significant portions of our infrastructure are at the point of needing to be overhauled or replaced, either in the next 2 to 3 years, some of that infrastructure. And when we get to roads, I mean, just doing a kilometer at a time in the long run isn't going to address the condition of our roads. So, I mean, it's great we got some done this spring, but we need to do much more. Notably, everyone's aware of the issues around the regional sewer. Although it's operated by Kings, we're a major funder of that, and it's probably going to require significant expenditures, again, to solve the issues with it and to make sure it's able to handle future growth, not just in Kentville, but in the outlying areas, because we're aware of plans for growth, south of New Minas, etc. You're all been aware of the challenges around the arena and the pool. The work we're doing on the pool now is a stopgap measure. We had hoped to get 10, but the contractor's in there and saying, well, maybe you're going to get 5 now out of it, just based on the condition they're seeing once they start uncovering things. The high traffic streets, many of them need resurfacing, particularly along Highway 1 and in the industrial park. I don't know if any of you have been through the industrial park lately, but it's, with all the heavy truck traffic, it's rapidly deteriorating. King's Transit, we're a funding partner there. They have a very old fleet. They want to get modernization. There was hope to get electrification, but that's probably been delayed due to some issues that have arisen elsewhere and the experience others are having. Despite what you may have seen on the news yesterday, that I would say was a rather rosy picture compared to what's actually happening on that news story we were seeing. Supply chain issues. The price of everything has gone up in the last years, and that's before the threat of tariffs. We don't have much in here in case we do have to buy a lot of tariff goods, but that's a bridge we'll have to cross when it comes to ordering some equipment. Climate change. That's putting a strain, as you're all aware, on our stormwater infrastructure. We received a master plan. Now we have to implement things within that master plan. We realize we have to do more maintenance on what we do have, plus expand on it in the future. Housing demand is still there. There's a lot of demand for housing, a lot of demand to develop. You've seen a number of things coming before council in recent months, short time I've been here, and we've talked about some significant projects. We've seen, for example, you saw last month's planning report with $13 million building development permit going through. So there's a lot of demand for service from our planning and development department that needs to be met. Inflation is, of the past few years, we're now having to adjust for that in our collective agreements, which were negotiated last year, and we're tied into those for another few years before those get negotiated again. The town, quite frankly, in recent years hasn't been putting enough aside in capital reserves to do some of this modernization work. Moving to having a deed transfer tax and putting that money in the capital reserve is a big step going forward, but it doesn't address the shortfall that's there now to be able to do some of these projects. On the revenue side, a lot of our revenue is somewhat flatlined. Provincial grants they give, for example, like MPAL grants, it's been 25,000, other than 1 year they might have thrown an extra in, it's back down to the old 25,000. It's never been indexed or changed for years. And there's other, the town foundation grant, other than a 1 year double payment, was $50,000 forever and a day, with no adjustment from the province on those things. With the development activity, that's going to take 2 years for those projects to be fully built and completed to generate the extra tax revenues. So there's always a lag behind that construction and getting the tax revenues. And the biggest one, quite frankly, is provincial cap program on assessment. That gap for us right now, when you look at the difference in the assessed values on the cap versus what it would be at market rates, amounts to $3 million in taxes if we had the same rates. If it weren't for the cap, we could have lower tax rates, and we could give a better exemption to lower income folks and be able to balance our budgets. But that cap has just created a huge gap over the years, and it's creating two classes of residential taxpayers, depending on how long you've owned your home. We've done, because we're talking about a significant deficit here and probably having to look at tax rates as part of this budget, I've done some comparatives numbers, and I'm not comparing to rural municipalities. They're in a different boat on how some things are funded, particularly roads. So all my comparisons I've done, you'll see on the second page of the report I circulated to council. I did 3 tables. One is looking at all the towns in Nova Scotia, all 25. I also did a comparison of all the towns within 170 kilometers of downtown Halifax, because that's where the development demand is. And the 5 significantly sized towns that have a municipal police force. I left Annapolis Royal out because it's such a small population base, it really doesn't do comparatives. So in all of those comparisons I did, we are certainly below the average. We're below the median rate. We're not the lowest rate, except among the police towns. But when you look at those first 2, the really low rates there, those are towns who invested in the big wind farm projects. We're getting substantial dividends from that. But now they're in pressure because Nova Scotia Power has appealed how their rates are calculated, and they want a piece of it to use their infrastructure. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on those towns to raise their rates as well, just from that revenue going away. So our rates at $1.43 and $3.30 really are very favorable compared to most towns. You are in a good competitive position to be able to attract investment both residentially and commercially. In addition, there's our industrial park, which is very competitive because it is at the county rates for commercial. Now, whether that's something as a long-term project, I would suggest you may want to consider looking at whether it's time to revisit that and see if there's a way to change the legislation, because was that really intended to stay in place beyond 50 years? That preferential treatment. Yes, there was a valid reason at the time you didn't want properties on either side of Harrington Road being treated substantially different, but maybe explore ways to try to see if we can phase in some of that difference being narrowed a bit. And you would still be competitive for industry and commercial businesses. The point I see that sort of tweaks to that is you're starting to see in the industrial park some offices as opposed to strictly commercial that required a freight yard or industrial. And that tells you that if commercial offices are moving there, is that really what you want, or are they just going there to get a tax break? So that's probably not what you want developing in an industrial park in the long term. We're not recommending by any stretch that you fund all of the budget shortfall from increased tax rates. We know that's unrealistic to put a big increase all in 1 year. There are things we can do. Wanda will go into, or I should say the director will go into ways to, some options we can consider there. What we do ask you is to, when we're talking about how to adjust budgets, keep in mind what we're talking about, where council's input belongs is what level of service do you want to provide to the ratepayers? So when you're talking, other than a few projects you may defer, whatever, what you're really talking about is, in order to make a meaningful change in your budget, you have to probably reduce service. And recognize if you want to increase service, anytime you increase service, there is a cost to that. So if there were plans to have a major service increase, maybe we want to delay until we get that where we can afford the services we have now. Or are there services you don't feel are priority? It's tough to do those where we haven't gone through a full strategic plan. I know the new CAO that'll be coming in wants to really work with you on that. And with management to come up with a good strategic plan that'll help you going forward with those issues. So today, as we say, we're here to give you the information, for you to try to understand what's behind the numbers, ask the questions you have today, go away, think about it, come up with more questions, get feedback from your ratepayers who may look up documents. Hopefully by tomorrow morning at the latest, we will have all the documents that you will see today will be posted online for them so the public can download those and look at them and try to understand them and ask you questions and that you can pass on to us to try to answer. So I'm going to sit and be quiet now. Director Matthews has all the expertise on the detail behind the numbers. I've tried to stay out of the weeds. And she'll, between us all here today, we'll try to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Director Matthews, the floor is yours. Okay.
Thank you. So, good evening, everyone, and thank you, CAO. I won't go through, reiterate anything that CAO Matheson has said. So the first couple of slides that I have there are really just pointing out that from a department point of view, the directors and myself would have gone through, looked at what the current mandate may be for those departments, looked at the data for the current year, the past year, for past 5 years, and really tried to pull together what would be a reasonable expectation for the upcoming year for both staffing and for expenditures. And our goal is to ensure that we have sufficient revenue stream to meet the priorities and the mandate and maintain a stable base or a mill tax rate as we have. So that was our attitude as we looked at what our operational demands were. Our CAO has very eloquently detailed our challenges, so I won't go through them again, but they will be in the presentation for those who choose to look at that at a later date. We will start off by talking about our revenue. So as we pre-circulated, our total revenue stream for this year as it currently sits, is 18,475,100, compared to our revenue stream of just 17 point close to 4 million last year, which is an increase of 1.1 million. The increase, though, is quite a bit higher than because of deed transfer tax. That was not in the budget last year, which you may have noticed in the documentation that you received. I wanted to just share what our assumptions were for our revenue. For everything other than our taxes, it is mainly based on last year's 24-25's actual, and if we've received confirmation of 25-26 funding sources, then those are embedded. We haven't made a lot of assumptions or escalation of those items. We have included a contingency within our conditional transfers for recreation grants. I know Director Langell has spoken to council in the past that they do seek a significant amount of funding through grants, none of which are guaranteed. In this budget already, we have assumed some grant money coming in at a rate of about 60%, just in case just in case we do not receive the level that we've asked for. Okay. So the summary by area, you can see the deed. So you can see in taxes, it makes up most of the increase of $1,039,548. The other areas are fairly flat. I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that although it shows a $1.1 million inflow, which seems rather large, it includes $500,000 for deed transfer. And so that brings us down. Plus, I've included about $18,000 for appeals as an estimate. We did have significant appeals, as you recall, last fiscal year. That's looking at the last 3 years. So those together would mean we'd have about $615,000 extra dollars this year. As you know, deed transfer goes directly to capital, so it's an in and an out. Just for illustrative purposes, wanted you to see where our revenues come from as a percentage of total, and for the most part, 51% is coming from residential and resource taxes, with 20% coming from commercial and property, and the rest are all under the 10% mark. So that is the bulk of where our revenues flow from. If you look, I've pulled in some slides from summary information received from PVSC annually. And when we look at our assessment year for 2025, you can see that our significant portion of our numbers of properties as well as our assessment values come from the residential side. A small amount from apartments and not a very large amount more from the commercial side. I wanted to highlight the cap as well, as CAO spoke of earlier. Our residential dwellings, 89% of those are capped. Last year, our cap percentage was 80, and the year before it was 77%. So as the cap percentage grows, then what we're seeing for increased revenue is really the increase for CPI that comes out from PVSC each year. And this year, that amount is much lower than it has been in the past. It's 1.5% this year. It's 1.5%. Last year, it was 3.2. The year before, it was 7.7. And the year before, it was 5.54. So when we look at that only having around $600,000 extra dollars this year to offset our costs, that is because that significant portion is capped. We're only getting 1.5% on that versus 3.2 from last year, which is, you know, a significant drop percentage-wise. Oh, sorry. And I've just pulled this slide in so you can see what, as CAO mentioned, the value that is eligible for cap is 430 million. It's 66% from a value point of view. And on the commercial side, we also have 31% of our commercials are exempt. So when we speak of that lost revenue, that just gives you a bit of perspective. I've also included for you information around sales. So those were our sales last year. They definitely will impact our transfer tax. And as you know, last year we started that in July, and we had significant sales in May and June once we made the decision to move forward with transfer tax. But you can see there what our average sale price is by year of home build to get a sense of what that looks like in the town. I thought that might be valuable as you're deliberating any potential tax change. So that is the focus on tax revenue generation, and wanted to move in to talk about a little more around our expense side. You can see we are targeting 19.3 million in expenses compared to last year, which is a $1.9 million increase. Of course, the differential there is close to an $800,000 deficit that was shared with you in your pre-circulated documents. Overall, you can see the changes there by major program area. As I move forward, I'm going to focus on the changes over the prior year's approved budget. As you can see, there is an unaudited preliminary amount for this current fiscal year. We're still working through that. And there are many variances between the actual and the approved budget that some of them are around one-time expenditures, some of them are ongoing pressures. We've received successful grant applications that we weren't anticipated. We know some of our partner organizations had surpluses that we had to book, we booked at year end. We've talked about housing costs that we didn't budget for, and there were staffing changes, in particular in the police, that would have occurred throughout the year, and other initiatives that we had planned and deferred. So that is a big reason why you will see that difference between the actual and what we are budgeting. So wanted to just put that out there in case, in looking at your draft 25-26 budget, looking at the past is always a bit of a good predictor, but in one given year, we don't always have predictable, stable spend. There are things that occur that kind of bring us outside of that budget target as soon as it's approved. As a percentage, you can see where the distribution of those expenditures are. I highlight that education, housing, and transit, which you see in the bottom right-hand corner, are 14.3% of our total overall spending. If you add debt in, that's 18.7. If we then move in valley waste and our hydrant area rate and our fire area rate, it's 28%. So just under a third, a little over a quarter of our spending relates to those areas that we are then just taking the money in and moving the money out, and to deal with our debt related to capital. And you can see as a percentage, the next biggest one would be protection, which would include police service along with our fire service and REMO and those other areas. Talking about the people side of the organization, I wanted to share what the assumptions were that we used, and as CAO mentioned, we do have collective agreements, and we have included the escalation amounts for cost of living within those agreements. The cost of living amounts vary from what the current CPI would be, and they are higher than that. So those are embedded within here. And as you saw from the FTE analysis that I provided for people, there are two changes in there, and one of them, we've actually calculated a vacancy, a contingency for vacancy. And I highlight that because those of you who were in council last year know that we said we weren't going to do that. If it's a standard position, we want to keep in place on a go-forward basis. So I wanted to highlight that so you knew that that kind of deviated from that policy, and we could talk about why we did that next. So if we look at our FTE changes, it's really under protective services and planning. Our seasonal staff are kind of ups and downs, just depending on the hours and whatnot, so not much to mention there, although you can see those programming changes that create that within the briefing that I provided. For police service, this past year, we made the decision to actually, as part of our recruitment strategy, given the high turnover on the police force, to sponsor a local individual to attend the academy. We had a seat, we have a return of service agreement. We aren't sure whether we will have a vacant spot when that person comes back. So we have budgeted, assuming when that person arrives, that we will need to spend part of that salary this year over and above. If we have a vacancy, we won't have that extra expenditure. But if we don't, we've made a commitment to that individual to come to try and stabilize the people and the work team on the force. The only other area is around planning and development. So as CAO mentioned, we are doing a lot of work from a development point of view with the hope to generate tax revenue in a few years. And to do that work, we anticipate having an additional development officer to support the director and the team. We currently have an individual in that temporary role, and we would be looking to extend that role. But where it is a new position, it is highlighted here because it was a temporary replacement last year. So those are the changes that we've made from a people point of view. On the expenditure side, you can see the assumptions that we have embedded in there. And I spoke previously around how we look at what the inflationary pressures are. We also have agreements with joint boards and other agencies, so we know what they've asked for. We've embedded that in. And we've assumed programming will be maintained for 24-25 levels, except where they're specifically identified, and those you could, we've just talked about in looking at the FT investments. So there are other areas that came forward to council for consideration that you pushed to budget time, and you'll see those specifically identified as well. And our recreation programming is the cost associated with what would have been presented, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Director Langell, but I believe that was in April. We brought forward that programming. On the so we're thinking about what makes up that large change. I've broken it into chunks. So if we look at our mandatory payments, our school board payments are up $222,356. So think about, we have an extra 600 so thousand in revenue, 222 of that needs to go to education. We have 14 more students this year, and we have our percentage is almost 10.6 of the total. So that number is higher. You can see that's driving those costs up by 10%. Our debt principal matches what our capital plan would be. These are all the external commitments and partnerships we have. And when we aggregate those, it's another 205,000 or an 8.3% increase. We have, in particular, inspections and 911, those are up to what we forecasted last year based on actual, because some of those are estimates. The rest are all based on contracts or budget submissions. So if you see the fire operating, that would have been the full budget that was presented and discussed previously. And Valley Waste and King's Transit would be the same. Those would have come to council before and been approved, and those are embedded within here. We do, just for information purposes, we do have Valley Waste Reserve Funds, and we have reserve funds for King's Transit within our operating reserves. But as CAO said, our reserves are not robust, but there are numbers there. So if we have any thoughts around utilization of such things as we talk about how to address and mitigate our gap, I have those numbers to share with you. They are significant for Valley Waste and rather small for King's Transit. On the people side, you can see that we have a lot of different pressures. It's $560,000 practically for the extra cost for staffing. Part of it, if you recall last year in the budget, I made assumptions around the collective agreement for police, and it was about $15,000 more than that. So we were pretty close, so we didn't have to adjust a lot. We've had significant staff turnover within police, as well as reclassification. So if somebody happens to move from, in the collective agreement, they have, on arrival, they get a certain pay, and then after 1 to 3 years, they get a different rate raise and so on. All of that accumulated to a negative $46,000 because we've had people come and go and coming in at different levels. But those people that would get increments based on their years of service and our benefit rates have gone up by $193,000. Our collective agreements have gone, cost of living adjustments per the contracts are an extra $258,000. So a significant cost of this same staffing complement that we would have last year. And then you can see the costs for overall for salaries and expenses for police and for the planning positions that we have suggested that we invest in. Based on our commitments for police and the demand that's there from a planning point of view. I think, yep, that's it for that. On the expenditure side, we do have increases there. They're only about 25.5 in total, but that's because we have replaced some one-time spending with one-time spending that occurred last year. So our stormwater master plan and our election costs, along with our facility condition assessment, are saving our budget reduction this year because they were built in the base last year. However, we have moved in the AVMVA request for grant of $100,000 that was brought forward to council that was asked to be considered during budget deliberations. So that's embedded in that bottom line. There was also a request of the previous council for us to create a recreation master plan. So that is $100,000 that's included in that bottom line that you're seeing. We also spoke about the human resource needs assessment work that we are engaged in, and that with the funding availability we're anticipating would be about a $20,000 cost. I've also just highlighted that this is last year was the final year for accounting and support for the fire department, so it's only about $11,000 cost to us this year, but that then brings us to nil for that work. We also have put forward for a climate action plan grant, and the grant value is $87,500, the costs are $87,500. We have a grant of $70,000, and it gives us the net cost of $17,500. And this is an area, and our strategic initiatives coordinator isn't here this evening, but is an area that she has highlighted that we need to have this plan to be able to get future grants that might be operating our capital related to, say, stormwater or other types of activities. They kind of want us to have this available to reach out and seek funding for other avenues. So that is included in here. I will highlight that the election arena and stormwater, we did pull money in from reserves to cover that. So it's a net zero to the bottom line, but if you're looking at your expenses and your revenue separately, it needed to be identified separately. We also have, even though it isn't a change, we've included the land use planning where we've talked about that with Director Shoup and his team, and the Town Hall and Recreation Complex Accessibility Study. Those two are both still included in there. That's $125,000, with that money coming from reserves that were set aside for those projects in 23-24.
Is that up there?
No, because there's no change. We had them in last year and we deferred them to this year.
Just,
So
yeah.
it doesn't show that there's an increase, but I wanted you to be aware, it's still a cost of $125 for us to do those this year. In the event that you choose to defer, or if you're looking at strategies to address things, they are in our total spend, no change from last year.
And those are for the two items, right?
Those are for the two. It's
Okay.
$75,000 we've set aside for the land use planning.
Yeah.
And $50,000 for the Town Hall and Recreation Complex
Okay.
accessibility study, which we have a mandate to address 2030, correct? Jennifer? 2030 for accessibility? Yes. Which is creeping up on us.
They're not there
They're
because
not
carried
there,
over.
because this is referencing the change this year over last year. Okay? But they are in our actual spend last year, or in our budget for 24-25, and in our budget for 25-26. Okay? So they're in our total costs, but not in our change. And we're focused, the presentation is focused on the major additions to the budget rather than what is in the base budget right now. Does that address your question, Counselor? Okay. So on the general operational side, there's $210,789 in increase asks. On the admin side, it's $35,000. I can $20,000 of that is just insurance. So there's not a lot of other increases in there. On the planning and economic development, you can see it is less. There were a couple of activities last year that they had hoped to do for about $11,000 that they didn't get to do, and they don't anticipate doing this year. So that's part of the reason for the change. On the transportation side, you'll see a larger number increase. You may have noticed when you looked this year over last year. Road repairs, storm sewer repairs, and on general operations, which would be vehicle maintenance and all of those things just to do the function that Director Bell's team needs to perform, is an extra $76,000. Those are reflective of the 5-year average. Last year's expenses were higher, but Director Bell and I did not get us to where we were last year. It is just bringing us to somewhere close to that 5-year average for those items. The police corps program is up $21,000, and of that is a contract. Part of it is our contract for dispatch. It's 11 of that. So very minor adjustments to those programs and services. If we look at Parks and Recreation, I've broken that down into more detail because there is the function of the administrative team and what they do, and then the programs. So you can see admin and facilities total is very minimally changed at about $14,000. If we look at our program nets, it would be $7,000 more in revenue coming in than what we would be spending. So that change is a positive change. Our pool, though, is pool operations would be $11,600 more. Our Nature Kids and Summer Day Camp, so those are combined together. Our Nature Kids, which is our before and after school program, that would actually has a surplus of $5,389. We've assumed 100% for the new cohort, the new class grouping that we planned on putting forward. We have a wait list, so we're hopeful that we would be able to achieve that. And the summer day camp would be a cost of $11,912. So that is the net, is for the two of those. We may get additional grants from government to support that. It just depends on, where we what our expenditures and revenues are and how much they're willing to give us. They won't put us in probably a huge surplus. So we haven't identified significant additional grants for that area. The pool program, you can see, is embedded within the net program expense of 72. So that is the actual swimming pool program that we have increased the staffing and have a manager on site and moved some of the training costs from a min down. So there is a bit of investment in there in change in hours, although we've reduced the work week and increased the number of weeks to make it as cost effective as possible. So those are the changes within Parks and Recreation, and then you can see this large expense for transfers from reserves, and that is because of those areas that we were saving money on the expense side of the stormwater, the arena, one of the projects on Darren's side of 4,000, sorry, Director Shoup, my apologies, was 4,000, and then the election reserve that came in at 51. So in total, those just negate the negatives on that other page that were one time. And then the 8,000 for reserves is related to just a reconciliation of the amount that we collect for some of our levies and then pay out to other payout. So that change was 8,000. So those are the major reasons for that 9 million, if I got that right, because I don't have the number right in front of me. Is that correct? Reason for those changes. And that I do have for you and will be loaded, so you will have that additional detail in your deliberations. A breakdown on the revenue and the expenses that will show you the remuneration, the benefits, along with the major expense categories by department. So that level of detail will be loaded on the site this evening for you to have, so that you'll be able to dive a little deeper into some of those costs, escalation and reductions, and what that might look like. So those will be available to you. And that leads us to the deficit that we have before us. How might we start thinking about addressing that? It is $794,000, which is significant. You know, some of the points that we thought you might be able to think about would be being less conservative with revenue. You may have noticed that on the revenue side, interest and penalties, the amount that we had in interest last year far exceeds the amount that we put in for a budget. That is mainly the interest on our bank accounts. And we don't know where interest rates go, so we generally try to be conservative there, but there may be an opportunity to increase that. We have 30,000 in unconfirmed conditional grants for recreation. We've put that under revenue rather than against recreation. And as you know, we've been successful in getting grants last year. That kind of drove our surplus up last year, which we forecasted, but we didn't put in the budget in case we didn't receive them, to make sure we set aside enough money to run the program. But we could be a little less conservative there, or a little more aggressive, whichever way you would like to look at that. I have a small amount of an allowance in for tax appeals of 18,000, but our cap rate is low. The number of appeals are down this year. We do have some big ones that are outstanding, but they're ones that I think traditionally those commercial or residential taxpayers appeal every year. Whether they'll be successful or not, we don't know. We also could think about deferring or denying the funding requests. We know there's 100,000 in there from the Mountain Bike Association. There may be others, so that's why I've highlighted some of the other planning activities that are built into the budget, even though they aren't a change from last year. However, we do have reserve money coming in to offset a couple of them, so it would keep our reserve money, but wouldn't necessarily impact that 794. We also had put in to increase the critical incident response reserve last year of 38,000. that was new. We could potentially remove that one, or perhaps others that we automatically assign in there and have for years. We also could utilize reserves, perhaps, for our funding partners where they're available. And I had mentioned that there are reserves for King's Transit and for Valley Waste. King's Transit's value is about $54,000, and Valley Waste, I believe, is over 300. So there is some availability there for those, if you want to consider that. We also have looked at user fees. I know in Parks and Recreation, they've increased their fees for some of their rentals and other user fees. We have been able to negotiate increases for our user fees for back check at a higher rate than cost of living. But there are fees within planning department for permits and within the finance department, say for tax certificates and so on, that haven't seen increases in years. We don't have a policy related to user fees and how we escalate those on an annual basis, so that might be something we could consider. Probably not huge dollars, but it does, if we're looking at any kind of a rate increase, it kind of makes those changes across the board, so that we're feeling it not only with ratepayers, but along with those who come for services, specific services with fees attached. We can look at service level adjustments. We could also look at increasing a tax rate for commercial, residential, and resource. So those were the kind of avenues that came to mind from a leadership perspective on things that we could consider, and certainly leave that up to you to deliberate and give us guidance around those next steps and how we estimate values of any potential changes to see how that impacts that overall deficit that we have identified based on all of the assumptions and estimation that we as a group of senior leaders have done to get to the product that you have today. And that concludes what I wanted to be able to share with you. And we're now, certainly, the team is open for any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much, Director. I know you guys put a lot of hours and days and weeks into that, so thank you for that. I'll open the floor now to council if you have any questions of the Director or the CAO, or if there's anything that they may need to call staff onto. And just to remind you, we're not debating the budget today, we're just receiving information, and so I'll open the floor now. Deputy Mayor Cole.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I noticed, thank you for your report, by the way. I noticed that you're projecting a $211,000 surplus, give or take, for this or for the past fiscal year.
Correct.
Has that surplus been injected into this budget, the new budget for 25-26, as a source of revenue?
It has not, because it is yet to be confirmed, but it is not. So
well,
that. Yeah.
I would suggest that maybe we consider putting whatever surplus back into this new budget, rather than transferring it to the operating reserve. Well, it might have to go to the operating reserve, but it'll come back.
Yeah.
It's just fund accounting. It's so much fun. If I may,
That's why it's built right in the word, fund accounting.
If I may ask another question? Sure. I'm happy to hear that the reserve funds still exist for KTA and Valley Waste. The intention of those funds, or the surpluses from those partners being placed in reserve, was to offset any increase in any particular budget that occurs. I heard that you have $54,000 in KTA and $300,000, give or take, in Valley Waste. We're looking at increases here in this budget that you presented. Valley Waste of $57,000, give or take. There's plenty of money in the operating reserve to offset that increase. And the Kentville, the KTA actual ask this year is $39,000. So there's plenty of money in the KTA reserve to actually offset that. So I would suggest that those monies be included in the revenue side of the budget to offset those increases. That's my questions for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baker.
Thank you. I'll just wait for the Director. And Director, I approached you prior to the meeting to try to understand these And I realize the first column is our unaudited 24-25 year. And I'm just coming back to the solid waste number, that our actual solid waste number was 507K this year. But last year's budget projected 758, and now we're projecting 815. To me, that looks closer to a $300,000 difference
Yes.
than a 57.
Correct. So two things happened with Valley Waste. In 23-24, they had a surplus. And they gave us our share of that surplus. We didn't expect that, so we didn't have that in the budget. But we have to book it. So it decreased our costs of $140,000 this year. So we had brought that forward as discussion previously. In 24-25, they've also told us they're expecting an $85,000 surplus. So we've had to book that. And then there was another adjustment for $25,000. So when you add all that up, it's almost $250,000 worth of surpluses for this year and last year that were realized. That meant we still paid them the full $800, and they reimbursed us part for those previous years.
Is there any idea of what their forecast might be for this year as far as
Well,
their actual need compared to?
So they've given us their budget, which would be their best estimate of what they need. They're only month 2 in, so their budget would be their best estimate. It does mean, though, that if, and unless CAO Matheson or any member of council who may sit at those tables, unless they are already predicting that they probably don't need that much, it would be an area that if we find they don't have the same demands as what the budget were throughout the year, it would give us some wiggle room from a forecast point of view, in case we have a very tight budget to deal with. Unless C.O. Matheson has something else you'd like to comment.
I don't think they factored in some positive things within that budget. They were anticipating to come on the, through the recycling initiatives and the responsibility programs. But those potential gains are factored in. And then there's also, they've got couple issues they have to deal with that weren't necessarily fully costed out in the budget, such as getting rid of 300 tons of drywall. And waste wood, which will now have to be shipped to Port Hawkesbury, so there could be some extra costs there. So I wouldn't anticipate seeing anything positive news much before October, November, if there is any positive. If fuel costs stay down, will help in some respects, because we won't have the big fuel adjustments within some of those contracts, but that'll take a few months to work out and see where those land.
Thank you.
Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the report. And to all the staff that put all the work into it, because I know it's a lot of work. So for me, the segment that we've just done and the dispo that you've covered off in the sections where you've talked about differentials, whether it's public works, whether it's police services, how so you're explaining sort of the rationale behind those numbers.
Right.
That will be really important for me moving forward, for me to see it and read it. So I know that we have your presentation from today, but sort of the vernacular that you had around it, the content that you had around it, that will be really, really important for me.
Yes.
Because when I look at this budget, and I looked at it last night, many of my questions now that I had, they're probably not really germane to the discussion today because of what you've explained in many of those things. I mean, I looked at, when I looked at transportation services, my first question was, is this public works? I guess it is.
It would be, yes.
Yep, now it is called that.
Yeah.
And I looked at the fact that there was a reduction in common services under that, but that's probably a net out.
It's a net, yeah.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The stormwater is a big one.
Right.
So if, if I didn't have a little bit of a snafu with the system this afternoon, you would have probably had this in your package, and Jennifer and I will get it to you this evening. But what it will do for you is provide under transportation services so if we look at what their proposed budget was, it's $3,035,079. It will break out what are common services, which would be admin, our work crew, the operation expenses, the vehicles, equipment. Then it will tie in with public transit's included there. And then under road transportation, you'll see sidewalk repair, storm sewers. So you'll be able to look at that level of detail to see how that aggregates up to the 150,000. I've outlined that in the PowerPoint, but you'll see it kind of line by line within in the document that will hopefully tie the presentation content together with your analysis that you've done, Councillor.
So where we're talking about Public Works, so one of the things that we heard with Dillon Consulting was around the maintenance piece. And sort of how that's going to be budgeted for the ensuing year. And from looking at this, I don't know that it is budgeted. I can't tell if it is or if it's
Right.
if it's not. I mean, they talked about, sort of the maintenance piece and making sure that the cleaning of the pipes and drains, preventative and those sorts of things. So I guess I need a better understanding if we've incorporated that into the budget.
So we have, and perhaps Director Bell can answer that more closely, but we have incorporated some additional costs, more looking at the 1 to 5 year, not a significant investment related to those recommendations, unless Director Bell wants to clarify that.
Because I'm asking more about the maintenance piece, right? That was a very big portion of or one of the larger portions of the consultant's report.
You are correct, Director Matthews. We included a $25,000 increase in maintenance for storm sewer just in this upcoming fiscal year for operating. Went from 90,000 to 115. Our actuals last year were above budget at roughly 104. So there's a $25,000 increase for maintenance alone. That isn't a lot of money, but it's also that's meant to be, for the most part, done in-house under Public Works and with some third-party assistance, whether that's a cleaning company like Loomers or one of those types of companies. But that is the only increase for storm sewer. The reason there's the big decrease is because last year we had the $100,000 study in operating, and that, of course, isn't in this year. So the net, that's a lot of the reasons why that net is less.
Okay.
The other big change was is street repairs, and we're budgeting 76,000 more this year over year.
Okay. Maybe if I could, Mayor, through you to the Director. The CAO in his commentary made a comment about regional sewer system is at capacity with significant demand for further capacity from both industry and housing. So my understanding of their regional sewer system, the regional sewer system, is that we are not at capacity, that we are at about 51-ish, 52% usage of the system in its entirety. And that when we think about the developments that are happening, whether they're Bryson's at the top of Acadia or whether they're Encore on School Street, that there is sufficient capacity in our regional sewer system to accommodate those developments. Is that not the case now? And I apologize if I misunderstood your commentary.
Through you, Chair. You are correct, Councillor. You've also sat on that committee, I think, for probably 8 or 9 years now, going to the 9th year. So that's the number they've always told us. We're at 51% hydraulic capacity for the plant, not Kentville, but the plant as a whole. Less than that, or I almost said organically, but I meant organic load The load is higher than the hydraulic capacity, so that means there's less room for larger industrial loads to be
Yes.
added to that, so they're at somewhere in the 70%
Okay,
organic load.
yeah,
Having said that as well, there's operational things that they're working on, as we speak today.
Yes.
Taking out some of that organic front end. They made some changes to the screening system, we won't get deep into that
No.
today, but
Yeah, I know.
they made some changes that, I was against a few years ago, and those are letting more organics in.
Yes.
And less pre-screened than
Yep.
what that plant was designed for.
That's right.
Originally 50 years ago, and then redesigned, or added on to more than that, 35 years ago. So they're revisiting that that doesn't change the hydraulic load, that is still in the 50% range.
Okay.
And residential waste is easy to treat.
Yes.
There's room for residential expansion, no question. That's just the plant, there's other components like pumping stations and force lines and all the components that make the overall treatment system and transmission pump system. So certainly there's room for that plant to take more load. They are looking at, other upgrades in the future. They've spent, millions, or we have
Yes.
collectively millions on capital upgrades, but
Yeah,
there will be some increased operating pressures as they continue to spend capital dollars. We'll
yeah,
be
for sure.
continuing to pay for it. I mean, separately through the sewer area service rate,
Right.
which is also, of course, going to have to go up
Right.
substantially, because it hasn't.
Yeah, in a number of years.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does,
Okay.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Maxwell.
Thank you. And
I
yes,
stay?
I
Yes.
would like you to stay. Just for one of my questions, and it is on the regional sewer. And I'm just wondering, obviously, we have an issue with the sewer plant. That's very obvious to anybody who's out walking around, especially in New Minas yesterday. It was awful. So I'm wondering, are there regular inspections being done to ensure that the big commercial users of the sewer system are treating their waste before it goes into our sewer system? Like, are there regular inspections? Because I think a lot of this, if we're at 51 capacity for residential, obviously this problem isn't coming from residential. And so the big users, I know they're the ones that pay the big bucks, but they need to be held accountable, and are regular inspections being done? Are they treating their waste before it goes into the catchment area? Thank you.
No, it's a great question. I don't really have an answer for you today, Councillor. We don't police it typically, as the town of Kentville. The County of Kings, CAO Matheson and I were at a meeting, a technical subcommittee meeting just a week or so ago with 12 people or more around the table talking about things like policing or sampling and mandatory sampling. And letters have been sent to the larger industrial and commercial users through a clause in the MGA that they have to permit us, I guess, if they're a town user in the town limits, or another, a good example that doesn't really name any names would be the Valley Regional Hospital. Doesn't sit in town, but they are one that have been delivered a letter that a composite sampler, they have to provide space so that the regional sewer committee would probably be expensing the cost of that sampler, but to provide space to put a sampler there. All that happens now in most of the situations is a weekly, at best, grab sample, and even those are few and far between. Like, they're weekly at the places that they're done, but those are the bigger users, and those users are charged accordingly under the spill charge by anything they're over and above the residential strength. Or there's a special clause, I think, in our own sewer bylaw that is particular to pipe plants, in that they get so much as a base, and then anything over and above, they get charged a load charge, essentially a year behind. So they base it on the previous year's monthly water consumption and apply that to the strength, and then they get the surcharge essentially a year behind, a year later. and we include that as revenue in our own sewer budgets. But charging them those minimal fees isn't the answer. It's to get their, whether they have to pre-treat to be in compliance, they're happy to pay the charges as in lieu of treating, because it's cheaper and it's just a cost of doing business on their behalf to pay that charge.
But obviously,
Some of it's
not, it needs to be treated.
some of it's that, some of it's, certainly there's questions about timing and operations, at the plant, and, I, for one, feel that they should be having, a larger, it's gonna cost money, but a larger, operating, complement of folks, whether that's 2 shifts a day, 7 days a week, instead of 1 shift a day, 5 days a week. That plant isn't a simple little, Hants Border residential treatment system. It's the biggest plant outside of the city, essentially. And if it's an operations and maintenance issue, then they need to staff it.
Let's,
as
I
such.
don't want to go into the
It's-
sewer
yeah,
right.
it's deep into
We're
that.
gonna stick to our operating budget. I don't want to
Yeah.
get into the sewer now. Those are
Well,
good
that's a big
questions.
part of our operating budget, so.
Yeah, that's a conversation we should have with the county.
Yes,
I think.
and
Yeah.
my point here is, I think it's time to have that conversation.
We will,
with
we'll
the
deal
county.
with that at maybe Monday night. We can-
Yeah.
That's a
All right,
good topic for Monday night.
My other point here is the FTEs.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not exactly sure what the other FTEs, I understand in planning that we want another person to help with the overload in planning, but I really don't know about the 0.5, the 1 for recreation, and the 0.4 in seasonal. I don't know what those are for.
Just gonna get to that sheet to make sure. So the 0.5, so that presumably you're referring to the one under police and law enforcement. So that would be the additional constable that we have a return of service agreement for. So we had a cadet, and the chief, if he has something to clarify, please do. But we knew that we needed to have a stable workforce, so we went ahead and put a cadet in the program. So we have to bring that person into our staff complement. If, at the time, we had how many vacancies, Chief? Multiple vacancies. I believe we are now fully staffed, so this person may be in addition to the full staff complement for a period of time until we have someone retire or depart. And that was happening so frequently, we had to do something. So this would be the cost impact of that if we don't have a vacancy.
Yeah, I want to say it was early in 2024 that the decision was made. We sat down and discussed it amongst the board, and then it was discussed further with the director and the CAO. It was put forth in my budget proposal to commission in 24. And the cadet was selected at no cost to us. It was all paid for. But to come back, and in order to do that, you had to offer a work term to do that, which was a 1-year work term. As Director Matthews said last year, as I've said many times, we replaced 7 police officers last year, right? So there was a lot of uncertainty of where we were, and we were in a position where not only were we trying to replace members, but we also have a staffing that's pretty close to retirement as well, right? So Councillor Hamilton would have been on the board at the time as well, and those were things we had brought forward as options on how we deal with the staffing retention issues. Yeah.
So with the full staffing, is it still necessary to have that 0.5 position?
So I could say, no, you don't have to, but there's a legal binding document that's gonna come back and cost you that.
Okay.
Yes.
In so
because
many
we-
words.
Yeah, we have a contract with that
go in queue.
individual
Yeah.
to come back and work for us for a year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the year, this year?
This is the year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
They will come back and start working for us in September.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay,
So we factored in just the cost from September to March.
okay.
Okay?
Yeah, that
That's that
clears that up.
vacancy piece that I said we did this year that we said we would try not to do. But
Okay,
in this
yes.
situation, given the dollar value and given that we may see a departure next year and that would absorb that cost, we don't want, it's not like we're saying we're gonna have one person in addition to the complement forever.
Right, okay, I
Okay?
understand
Does
that.
that make?
Recreation and the one for recreation and point four?
Sure, so,
Seasonal.
and Director Langella will have more to add, but I do want to highlight that when we did our budget last year in May, I wanted to demonstrate the amount of full-time equivalents and people we actually bring in seasonally. So it's 47 people that we bring in for our summer programming. And the FTEs, we've calculated, and you can see that there's a change there, and it's actually showing a minor increase. That is because I did the budget based on what the target would have been in April. The actual staffing complement that Director Langella and the team brought in might have differed. So that's a budget change to change, but it may not be as significant a change from what last year's complement ended up being once they started hiring.
Okay.
So I just put that out there, and Director Langella, I'm sure, can clarify the details.
Okay,
Yes, there's no permanent employees being added. It's all through summer employment. We have our environmental lead position that we hired this year, which is 60% covered through a grant. So that's one portion of it. We have one additional summer staff to help with watering now that we're adding plants along Webster Street for the barrier. So we were already at capacity before that. We are adding 2 part-time aquatic staff members and bringing that director down as well, because a lot of our students last year were, getting upwards of 50 hours a week, which we just need more bodies. And then we're going to have an extension of the Nature Kids program, which would bring in additional staff. And then we have, we're moving day camps from 4 weeks to 7 weeks. So that adds in hours and to the FTE allotment.
okay, so I'm reading that these are all seasonal, this one.
Correct. Exactly.
And 4 point, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And as the director said, some of those programs had funding assigned to them.
Yes.
So even though we're enhancing the program, we're actually, for Nature Kids, for example, it will break even.
Yeah,
Or be a little bit more than break even.
all right.
Yeah.
Deputy Mayor Kroll.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. For the 25-26, Director Matthews, what is 1 cent on the residential rate?
It would be, on the residential rate, about 65,000,
And what would it be for the commercial rate?
7,800.
And what would the rate for the Kentville Business Park be for this year? The rate for the Kentville Business Park?
If we were to make a change to the legislated?
No.
Oh, what is the rate?
What is the rate?
Oh, my apologies.
229.
229?
It's 228.7, 2.287.
Oh, yes.
When I was calculating the differential, I
Yeah.
just rounded.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2.287.
Hasn't changed.
It hasn't changed.
The information that you intend to send off tonight, is that information going to explain to us the variance between the budget last year and the budget this year?
Correct.
For example, like other programs, I'm just picking one out of
Yeah.
I'm looking at other programs under recreation, we're looking at a $97,000 increase, 76.4%.
Right, and that
So will
is-
it show
Yes.
the reasons why that has gone
It
up
will.
or gone down or whatever, so?
It will. All of those are in the slides, but yes, it will. And the main driver, just want to be sure that I've got the right category. I believe the main driver under recreation programs is the $100,000 ABA-MB. I always say that wrong. The Mountain Bike Association, the grant that they had requested through the council. So that 100,000 is in recreation programs.
Okay, thank you.
So the detail will be by category, and the deputy clerk has that and may have loaded it or will probably load it shortly onto your SharePoint.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Hamilton.
going back to the police constable there, we had talked about in the past, we had, I guess it's a question for you again, sorry, through the mayor, we had a lot of overtime over the years. Will that position balance out that overtime that we always used to? We were going to consider having overstaffing. Will that position now balance out some of that overtime so it'll actually break even or under?
I would suggest that a lot of our overtime has been from our shortages in the last few years, not so much day-to-day policing.
Not the day-to-day,
Yeah.
okay.
And contractually, it could potentially, but it's hard to dictate where that person's gonna be to cover off overtime shifts, so, yeah.
Because there was a consideration to do like some overstaffing anyhow in the future, and that position, depending on how it's forecasted, and
Yeah.
I guess.
And I would just add that we haven't factored in any increase to overtime budget, even though we've exceeded the overtime budget each year for the last couple of years.
Okay.
Just so you know, we didn't add anything in to kind of reflect what our experience has been, correct?
Okay.
Other than the cost of living adjustment on
Yes.
what the base was already there. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Councillor Savage.
Thank you, Mayor. The deputy mayor actually asked my questions around the 1 cent on res and 1 cent on commercial. And then further, the 229 in the business park. So, which is a great segue into my question, if I can, through you to the CAO. You mentioned about the change in legislation and the preferential treatment they get on the rate, the tax breaks. So, and I have understood and have seen that there are more offices going in there, accountant offices or what have you, stores and the like. That agreement, that legislation, we are bound to it, I'm assuming, and it has been in effect for 50 years?
Since 1983, it's what's called a local act enacted in the legislature. So there are, in addition to what you might see when you look at the legislature website, there's a whole bunch of older statutes
Okay.
that were implemented to enable towns, rural municipalities, communities to do various and sundry things. So there's several what they call local bills that apply only to Kentville, and this would be one of them. So what it does, it says, and it doesn't have an end date or whatever, it just says, industrial estates had built this industrial park to be run by a commission, and that by way of this bill, the rate charged for commercial taxes within the industrial park shall not exceed the lower of the town of Kentville commercial rate or the municipality of the county of Kings commercial rate.
So what is entailed in changing that? And I'm not that I'm for changing it for all you people out there.
So this is something I just started on today, but as I understand it briefly, would be if you did want to look at changing it, you would have to have the support from the local MLA. There is a special committee of the legislature that looks at local and they also look at the private members' bills.
Okay.
So it's a chore to get them on the order paper to start, unless the local MLA can convince the premier it's a good issue to address. Now, sometimes things can get accelerated, but quite often it can take 2 or 3 years to work through a process. But it is just I'm just throwing it out there as something as you're going for it's going to take a couple of years as you go through your strategic planning, is that something, is it as valid today as it was then? Is there a mechanism to change it? Is there a way? The trouble is when it's to repeal it, there's no gradual phase out, which I would see as a bit of a problem. So it may have to be replaced or amended first.
Right.
And then some years later repealed, so.
Because when you think that our commercial tax rate now is $3.30 and they're paying literally $1 less, right?
Yeah.
I don't know what kind of revenue we generate from the business
Yeah,
parks.
well, I'm just saying, if
Roughly.
it was at our rate,
Yeah.
it would generate an additional 475,000.
Did you already say that?
No,
No.
I'm just,
Okay, good, sorry. Okay.
No.
Really?
yes. So there's some money that's on the table,
Yes.
but there were certainly valid reasons. Don't get me wrong, there were very valid.
To do it at the time.
At
back
the
in
time, but I
83.
don't think it, in the long run, as you filled up the park,
Yes,
there should have been a mechanism built in to try to bring the two without unduly penalizing the people on the Kings County
Of course.
side of the road, et cetera, so you're not creating a large difference, so.
right, okay.
Again, it was just something I flagged as I was looking at numbers today, and I started wondering what the difference is, and then I said, ooh, that's a big difference, I better go
Yes.
look at the legislation.
For sure, okay. Thank you.
Okay, I guess there's no further questions, so I'll thank the director and all the staff, and I will just make a little note here to council. If you have questions, and you will tonight, when you're laying in bed or whatever you do in the evenings, you're going to have questions, so shoot them off to Director Matthews, but copy all of us so that we all get the same answer, so that she's not inundated with the same question 8 times or 7 times, and that way we can all receive the same information. So we will adjourn this meeting. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Councillor Savage and Deputy Mayor Kroll, all those in favor? Those opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.